Close your eyes and imagine a 1950s high school. What do you see? Perhaps you're picturing scenes from Grease, or Happy Days, poodle skirts twirling, leather jackets gleaming, teens dancing to rock and roll at the sock hop. The soda fountain where everyone hangs out. The perfectly styled hair. The innocent romance. The carefree teenage life. It's a compelling image, and like most nostalgia, it contains fragments of truth wrapped in layers of selective memory and Hollywood glamour. The 1950s American high school was real, but it was far more complex, more rigid, and in many ways more alien to modern sensibilities than our romanticized versions suggest. Today, we're going to step back into those halls. We'll experience what a typical day actually looked like for American teenagers in the 1950s, not the Hollywood version, but the real one. The dress codes that were strictly enforced. The social hierarchies that seemed carved in stone. The expectations that shaped every aspect of teenage life. The freedoms that didn't exist. And yes, the genuine moments of joy and community that made those years memorable for those who lived them. This is high school in the 1950s. The real story? It's 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in 1956. Susan Miller, a junior at Lincoln High School in a mid-sized Midwestern town, wakes to the sound of her alarm clock, an actual mechanical alarm clock that she must wind each night. Her morning routine would be almost unrecognizable to modern teenagers. There's no smartphone to check, no social media to scroll through, no group chats to catch up on. Instead, Susan heads to the bathroom, possibly shared with siblings, to begin the elaborate process of getting ready for school. Her hair requires significant work. The popular styles of the 1950s don't happen naturally. Susan sets her hair in pin curls or rollers the night before, and now she carefully brushes it out into the desired style, perhaps a soft page boy or the fashionable ponytail with carefully curled bangs. This process takes at least 20 minutes. Hairspray, recently introduced to the consumer market, is applied liberally to maintain the style throughout the day. Makeup is permitted, but it must be subtle, natural-looking, in the parlance of the time, though achieving this natural look requires considerable effort. A light foundation, powder, carefully applied lipstick in pink or coral shades, and perhaps a touch of mascara. Anything more dramatic risks being sent home by the vice principal for violating the appearance code. Now comes the critical decision, what to wear. And here's where modern students would encounter their first major shock. Susan's choices are extremely limited, not by her wardrobe but by strict, enforced school dress codes. Girls at Lincoln High, like most American high schools in the 1950s, are absolutely forbidden from wearing pants. Not jeans, pants of any kind. The only acceptable attire is dresses or skirts, and those skirts must reach at least to the knee, preferably below. Each morning, the vice principal, Mrs. Henderson, conducts knee checks, where girls must kneel on the floor. If their skirt doesn't touch the ground, they're sent home to change. Susan chooses a pleated skirt, a cardigan sweater over a modest blouse, bobby socks, and saddle shoes, the uniform of respectable teenage girlhood in 1950s America. The outfit is completed with a thin belt and perhaps a small scarf tied around her neck. Meanwhile, her male counterpart, Tom Anderson, faces his own strict dress code. Long hair on boys is absolutely forbidden. His hair must be cut short, neat, and off the collar. He wears slacks. Jeans are prohibited during school hours, a button-down shirt, and leather shoes. Many schools require boys to wear ties. Facial hair, even the slightest stubble, is grounds for suspension. Both Susan and Tom understand that these aren't suggestions. They're rules enforced as strictly as any academic requirement. Appearance in the 1950s is considered a reflection of character, and schools act in loco parentis, in place of parents, with authority to regulate every aspect of student life. Susan's father drives her to school. She won't get her own car, as relatively few teenagers have their own vehicles in the 1950s, even in car-crazy America. Those who do have cars are typically boys from more affluent families, and their vehicles become important status symbols in the high school hierarchy. The school building itself is a solid brick structure, built perhaps in the 1920s or 1930s, reflecting the architectural confidence of that era. There's no air conditioning, windows are opened in warm weather, and students swelter through May and early June. In winter, radiators clank and hiss, creating uneven heating that leaves some classrooms frigid and others stifling. As students arrive, a scene unfolds that would be remarkable to modern observers. There's no visible security. No metal detectors, no security guards, no cameras, no ID badges. Students simply walk into the building. The idea of school shootings or violence is so remote that it doesn't factor into anyone's thinking. Discipline problems exist, certainly, but they typically involve talking back to teachers, smoking in the bathroom, or the occasional fistfight, not the fears that will haunt later generations. The hallways are crowded with students, but the noise level is notably controlled. There's chatter and laughter, but it's modulated. Students know that excessive noise or running in the halls will result in swift punishment. Teachers stand at their classroom doors, monitoring the hallways with authority that's rarely questioned. What's striking to any observer is the homogeneity. In most American high schools in the 1950s, the student body is overwhelmingly white. This is the era of separate but equal. The Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision came in 1954, but implementation is slow, contested, and in many places, simply ignored. Many schools, particularly in the South but also in the North, remain effectively segregated. When integration does occur, it's often painful, contested, and incomplete. The social hierarchy is immediately visible. At the top are the athletes, particularly football players, and cheerleaders. Then come the class officers and those involved in acceptable extracurriculars. Below them, various other groups occupy their niches. At the bottom are those who don't fit, the too poor, the too different, the academically struggling. This hierarchy is rigid and largely unquestioned. Social mobility within it is limited. The school day starts with homeroom at 8 a.m. sharp. Students stand as the teacher enters, a mark of respect that's absolutely required. Then comes the morning ritual that would be contentious in later decades but is simply routine in the 1950s, the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone stands, hands over hearts, facing the American flag that hangs in every classroom. They recite in unison, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." That phrase, "under God," was just added in 1954, partially in response to Cold War fears of godless communism. No one questions it. No one sits out the pledge. The idea of conscientious objection to this daily ritual simply doesn't exist in most schools. Announcements follow, read over a primitive PA system that crackles and distorts. There's news about the upcoming football game. Football dominates fall social life in a way that's hard to overstate. There's a reminder about proper dress code compliance. A notice about sock hop preparations. A stern warning about smoking on school grounds. Then students head to their first class. The building has no air conditioning, no computers, no smart boards. Instead, there are blackboards, actual black or green boards with real chalk that creates clouds of dust. Overhead projectors are cutting-edge technology, and not every classroom has one. Class sizes are often large. 35 to 40 students isn't unusual. Students sit in individual desks bolted to the floor in neat rows. The teacher's desk is at the front, positioned on a slightly raised platform in some rooms, emphasizing the hierarchy. The teacher is Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Never a first name, never a casual nickname. That would be unthinkably disrespectful. Let's sit in on Susan's English class. Mrs. Patterson is teaching, and that Mrs. is notable. Most female teachers in the 1950s are either unmarried or, if married, often without children. Many school districts have policies requiring women to resign when they become pregnant. Teaching is seen as a suitable career for women, but motherhood is expected to be a full-time occupation. Mrs. Patterson is teaching a novel, but the curriculum would surprise modern students. The books are almost exclusively by white male authors: Hemingway, Steinbeck, Fitzgerald. Female authors are rare. Authors of color are nearly absent. The canon is narrow, reflecting the cultural assumptions of the era. The teaching style is formal and teacher-centered. Mrs. Patterson lectures, students take notes. There's limited discussion, and when it occurs, students must raise their hands and be called upon. Speaking out of turn results in immediate censure. The idea of collaborative learning, student-centered pedagogy, or questioning the teacher's interpretation is largely foreign. Students write in notebooks with fountain pens or ballpoint pens, a relatively new technology. Mistakes mean crossing out or starting over. There's no delete key, no spell check, no autocorrect. Penmanship matters and is graded. Sloppy handwriting results in lower grades, regardless of content quality. One of the most striking aspects of 1950s high school life is the rigid gender division that permeates every aspect of the educational experience. This isn't subtle, it's explicit, institutionalized, and considered entirely natural. Let's follow Tom to his next class, shop. This is a required course for boys at Lincoln High, meeting 3 times a week. In the shop classroom, boys learn woodworking, metalwork, basic automotive repair, and other, practical, skills considered essential for men. The shop teacher, Mr. Carlson, is gruff, masculine, and brooks no nonsense. This is where boys learn to be men, or so the thinking goes. Meanwhile, Susan heads to home economics. This too is required for girls, meeting just as frequently as shop for boys. In the home EC room, which is set up like a domestic kitchen, Miss Reynolds teaches the skills deemed essential for future wives and mothers. Today's lesson is on proper table setting and menu planning for family dinners. Over the semester, Susan will learn to cook standard American dishes, sew clothing and household items, manage a household budget, and even practice proper etiquette for entertaining. There's an explicit curriculum, but there's also an implicit one. Girls are being prepared for their primary future role as homemakers. Career aspirations are acceptable as a temporary phase before marriage, but few teachers actively encourage girls to plan for lifelong careers. The guidance counselor's office reflects these assumptions starkly. When Tom meets with Mr. Jenkins to discuss his future, the conversation centers on college options, career paths, military service. The assumption is that Tom will work, will support a future family, will have a career that defines his adult identity. When Susan has her appointment, the conversation is different. Miss Warner, the female guidance counselor assigned to girls, asks about Susan's interests, yes, but then quickly moves to practical questions. Does Susan plan to marry after high school? If she's considering college, has she thought about teaching or nursing, suitable careers for women that are compatible with family life? The assumption underlying every question is that Susan's primary future role is as wife and mother. Any career is supplementary to that central identity. This isn't cruelty or even necessarily conscious sexism, it's simply the worldview of the 1950s, when gender roles are considered natural, fixed, and beneficial. The idea that women might have careers equal to men, that domestic labor might be shared, that gender might not determine destiny, these are fringe ideas, confined to small groups of feminists largely dismissed as radical. The academic tracking reflects this too. Math and science classes have fewer girls, and those who excel often face subtle discouragement. Math isn't really a girl's subject, a teacher might say, not maliciously but matter-of-factly. Boys who show interest in literature or arts might similarly be steered toward more masculine pursuits. Physical education is strictly segregated by sex, with different activities. Boys play competitive sports, football, basketball, baseball. These games matter. Scouts attend. College scholarships are available. There's a path from high school athletics to higher education and even professional sports for the exceptionally talented. Girls' PE is different. They play some sports, yes, but the emphasis is on graceful activities, dance, gymnastics, volleyball. Competition is downplayed in favor of cooperation and aesthetic movement. The idea of athletic scholarships for women is virtually non-existent. Title IX, which will revolutionize women's sports, is still nearly 2 decades away. Lunch period arrives, and the cafeteria scene is iconic, though perhaps not quite as Hollywood portrays it. Students line up for lunch, which is served by lunch ladies, who dish out standard American fare, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls, and dessert. Everything is served on divided plastic trays. Milk is the standard beverage, white or chocolate. The cost? Perhaps 25 cents for a full meal. Some students bring lunch from home in metal lunch boxes or paper bags. The food isn't gourmet, but it's substantial and consistent. For some students from poorer families, this school lunch is the most reliable meal of their day, though this reality is rarely discussed openly. The cafeteria itself is a theater of social dynamics. Seating isn't assigned, but it might as well be. The social hierarchy determines where everyone sits, and crossing these invisible boundaries is difficult and potentially socially catastrophic. At the best tables, near the windows, sit the popular kids, the athletes, the cheerleaders, the class officers. These are the students who will be featured in the yearbook, who will be remembered, who define the school's social life. They're usually from the more affluent families, though there are exceptions for particularly talented athletes or exceptionally attractive girls who've been accepted into the elite group. Surrounding them are concentric circles of decreasing social status. The band kids sit together. The brains, academically focused students, cluster at their own tables. The greasers, if the school has them, working-class kids with slicked-back hair and a rebellious attitude, stake out their territory, often near exits. And then there are those who sit alone or in small, defensive clusters. The outcasts, the different, the poor, the awkward. In the hierarchical world of 1950s high school, there's little social safety net for those who don't fit in. Dating and romance dominate social conversation, but it's highly structured by modern standards. Going steady is a serious step. When a boy gives a girl his class ring or Letterman jacket, it's a public declaration of exclusive relationship. Wearing his ring on a chain around her neck or his jacket with the sleeves rolled up announces to everyone, she's taken. The rules of courtship are elaborate. Boys ask girls out, never the reverse. Dates are formal. The boy picks up the girl at her home, meets her parents, promises to have her home by curfew. A typical date might involve a movie, a soda fountain, and perhaps parking at a local lover's lane, though what happens there is constrained by strict social mores. Premarital sex exists, of course, but it's heavily stigmatized and hidden. Girls who get pregnant face catastrophic social consequences, expulsion from school, often being sent away to relatives, to give birth quietly, and lasting social stigma. Boys face far fewer consequences. This double standard is rarely questioned. The school doesn't provide sex education, at least not explicitly. What exists is usually limited to a single awkward session about hygiene, and vague warnings about keeping oneself pure. Most teenagers learn about sex through whispered conversations, smuggled magazines, and fumbling experimentation, often with considerable misinformation. Homosexuality is absolutely invisible in official school life. It exists, of course, but it's so deeply closeted that many gay and lesbian teenagers don't even have the vocabulary to understand their own feelings. The few who do understand live in constant fear of discovery, which would mean not just social destruction but potentially criminal prosecution. Homosexuality is illegal in most states. After lunch, the school day continues with afternoon classes, but the real social life of 1950s high school happens in extracurricular activities. These aren't optional add-ons. They're central to the experience and crucial for college applications and social status. Football dominates the fall. Friday night games are community events, drawing not just students but parents, alumni, and townspeople. The team members are celebrities within the school, their exploits detailed in the school newspaper and local press. Being on the varsity football team virtually guarantees social status, dating opportunities, and community respect. Cheerleading, for girls, is the equivalent prestigious activity. Cheerleaders are selected through tryouts that are intensely competitive and often political. They represent the school, they're featured at games and assemblies, and they occupy the pinnacle of female social hierarchy. The cheerleading squad usually consists of the most popular, attractive girls from affluent families. Other sports exist: basketball, baseball, track, but they're secondary to football in most schools. Girls' sports, as mentioned, are minimal and not taken seriously. Beyond sports, there are other activities. The school newspaper, typically a modest mimeographed publication, provides news and gossip. The yearbook committee works on the annual, which is a major publication. In an era before social media, the yearbook is how students preserve memories and maintain connections. There are clubs: Future Farmers of America in rural schools, Future Homemakers of America for girls, science clubs, language clubs. Participation in these activities looks good for college applications, but they also serve as social sorting mechanisms. The drama club produces plays, though the selection is conservative: Shakespeare, perhaps some wholesome American comedies. Anything controversial or challenging is avoided. Student performers take it seriously, but drama isn't considered a prestigious activity like athletics. Music programs are significant. Many schools have marching bands that perform at football games and competitions. Concert bands and choirs provide outlets for musical students. This is before rock and roll becomes respectable, so school music programs focus on classical music, show tunes, and patriotic songs. Student government exists, with elected class officers. These positions carry prestige, though the actual power student governments wield is minimal. They plan dances, organize fundraisers, and provide leadership experience, but they don't challenge school policies or advocate for student rights. That concept hasn't yet emerged. The social calendar revolves around dances. There's the homecoming dance in the fall, centered around the football game against the school's main rival. There are regular sock hops, informal dances where students remove their shoes to protect the gym floor, dancing to records played over the PA system. And there's the prom, the pinnacle of the social year. The prom in the 1950s is formal, expensive, and freighted with social significance. Girls wear elaborate gowns, tea-length or full-length dresses that require months of planning and significant family investment. Boys wear suits or tuxedos. Corsages and boutonnieres are exchanged. The event includes formal photographs, a dance at the school gymnasium decorated with a theme, and often after-parties at homes or restaurants. Not everyone goes to prom. Those without dates, those who can't afford appropriate clothing, those outside the social mainstream, they stay home. There's no celebrating, going solo, or attending with friend groups. Prom is for couples, and not attending marks social failure. What's most striking about 1950s high school life, from a modern perspective, is the sheer number of rules and the strictness of their enforcement. Every aspect of student life is regulated, and questioning these regulations is considered inappropriate if not outright defiant. The dress codes we've mentioned are just the beginning. There are rules about behavior in the halls: walking on the right side, no running, no public displays of affection. That last rule is serious. Holding hands might be tolerated, but kissing in school results in detention or suspension. The idea of teenagers being sexual beings is officially denied, even as everyone knows the reality is more complicated. There are rules about language. Profanity results in immediate punishment. Talking back to teachers, even questioning their statements, is considered insubordination. The teacher's authority is absolute within the classroom. The principal's authority is absolute within the school. Parents generally support this authority rather than challenging it. Corporal punishment is common. Paddling, hitting students with wooden boards, is a standard disciplinary tool, particularly for boys. A student sent to the principal's office for serious infractions might well receive several swats. This is considered normal, appropriate, and even character-building. The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," reflects the prevailing philosophy. For girls, punishment is more often social, being excluded from activities, having privileges revoked, being subjected to public shaming. A girl caught smoking, for instance, might be suspended and her name announced in assembly as a warning to others. The school's authority extends beyond the building and the school day. Students can be punished for behavior off campus if it reflects badly on the school. Being seen at inappropriate places, associating with the wrong people, or engaging in rebellious behavior during weekends can result in school discipline. There are no student rights as we understand them today. The concept that students might have free speech protections, privacy rights, or due process in disciplinary matters simply doesn't exist. Schools operate under the principle of in loco parentis, in place of parents, with broad authority to regulate student behavior. Suspension and expulsion are used freely. Pregnant girls are expelled immediately, with no accommodation for continuing their education. Students with serious behavioral problems are simply removed. The idea that schools have an obligation to educate all students, regardless of challenges, hasn't yet taken hold. Interestingly, despite these strict rules, or perhaps because of them, the school building itself is relatively orderly. Graffiti is rare. Vandalism is minimal. Fights, while they occur, are infrequent. Students generally comply with rules, not necessarily because they agree with them, but because the consequences of defiance are clear and consistently enforced. The school day ends at 3:15 p.m. Students flood into the hallways and out the doors, their behavior noticeably more relaxed now that they're leaving the building. Some head to after-school activities or jobs. Others go home. For many students, particularly boys, after-school jobs are common. They work at gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants, or help with family businesses. The money isn't usually for necessities. Most 1950s teenagers from working and middle-class families have their basic needs met. Instead, they're earning money for cars, dates, clothes, and the growing consumer culture aimed at teenagers. This is significant. The 1950s see the birth of the teenager as a distinct consumer category. For the first time in American history, adolescents have disposable income and are targeted by advertisers. Record companies, clothing manufacturers, movie studios, and others recognize teenagers as a market. This creates a youth culture that's beginning to differentiate itself from adult culture, though it's still firmly constrained by adult authority. Some students head to soda fountains or diners, the real ones, not the Hollywood versions. These are gathering places where teenagers can hang out, play the jukebox, and socialize away from adult supervision, though never entirely without it. The owner keeps an eye on things, ready to kick out anyone causing trouble. Others go home to do chores and homework. Homework expectations are substantial, several hours per night for college-bound students. Without calculators, computers, or internet, research means library trips and encyclopedia consultations. Math requires actual calculation. Writing means draft after handwritten draft. For girls, homework competes with domestic responsibilities. Many are expected to help with cooking, cleaning, and caring for younger siblings. These aren't optional, they're assumed duties of daughters. Boys might have yard work or repairs, but their domestic obligations are typically lighter. Evening social life is limited by modern standards. Some students might talk on the phone, the family's single shared telephone, often located in a common area with no privacy. Conversations are kept short because tying up the phone line is inconsiderate to other family members. Long-distance calls are expensive and rare. There's no texting, no social media, no video calls. Friendships and relationships require face-to-face interaction or letters. Notes are passed at school, phone calls are brief, and hanging out means actually being together physically. Television is becoming common, and popular shows like American Bandstand give teenagers a window into youth culture beyond their own communities. But TV is still limited, a few channels, black and white for most families, and viewing often controlled by parents who select the programs. So was high school in the 1950s really better, as nostalgia often suggests? The answer is complicated. For some students, particularly white, middle-class, conventionally attractive, heterosexual teenagers who fit the mold, the 1950s could be genuinely pleasant. There was security, structure, clear expectations. Communities were stable. The future seemed predictable and promising. The innocence that nostalgia celebrates was real for some. But this experience wasn't universal, and the nostalgia often erases those for whom the 1950s were difficult or oppressive. For African American students, particularly in the South, this era includes the trauma of segregation and the violent resistance to integration. For Hispanic students in the Southwest, discrimination and educational inequality are routine. Asian American students face lingering prejudice from World War II. Native American students often attend separate boarding schools designed to strip them of their culture. For girls with ambitions beyond homemaking, the era was frustrating, their potential systematically limited. For LGBTQ students, it was often terrifying, forcing them into hiding and denying their identities. For students from poor families, the apparent prosperity of the era often passed them by. The sock hops and proms weren't accessible. The college prep classes weren't for them. They were tracked into vocational programs and low expectations. For those who were simply different, too intellectual, too artistic, too questioning, the conformity pressure was stifling. The rigid social hierarchies left little room for individuality. The 1950s high school experience was marked by certainty about gender roles, racial hierarchies, social order, and America's place in the world. This certainty provided comfort for those who fit within its boundaries, but it was confining and often cruel to those who didn't. The changes that would come in the 1960s and beyond, civil rights, feminism, student rights, questioning of authority, weren't random rebellions. They were responses to real limitations and inequalities in the system that the 1950s represented. So when we look back at 1950s high schools, we should see them clearly, not through the gauzy filter of nostalgia, nor through the lens of simplistic condemnation, but as complex institutions that reflected their time, with both genuine strengths and serious flaws. The Bobby socks and saddle shoes, the sock hops and soda fountains, the Letterman jackets and poodle skirts, these were real. But so were the dress codes that controlled bodies, the rigid gender roles that limited potential, the racial segregation that denied equality, and the conformity pressure that crushed individuality. High school in the 1950s was, like all eras, a mixed legacy. It's worth remembering accurately, learning from honestly, but not necessarily recreating nostalgically. The past is another country. They did things differently there. Some of those differences we might admire. Others we're right to have left behind.